If there's one thing we as a society can collectively agree upon, it's the fact that video games have come a long way since their original debut back in 1958, both as a respected form of art and as a digestible media product. From pixelated Pong tournaments to open-world sandboxes, nowadays the gaming economy is as successful as it's ever been, and I'd even argue there's a game out there for everyone, even if you're someone who doesn't particularly consider yourself a gamer. I bring all of this up because I've always sort of thought of myself as this superb gamer guy that has a lot of, well, gaming experience under his belt. And don't get me wrong, I'm still 100% proud of the accolades I've stacked along my gaming journey, and there will forever be moments that stick with me and replay in the back of my head from time to time. But as I slowly advance in age and continue to play video games, of course, the more I've started to realize I've actually missed out on a multitude of different games over the years. Right now, I'm sure there are probably like 1,000 or more games that would really pique my interest and genuinely have myself devoted to them, but for one reason or another, they've just haven't crossed my radar yet. Just Cause was one of those games that I've been somewhat familiar with for a long time now, on the surface level at least, but for some reason I'd never actually completed the game, let alone did I even dedicate more than 30 minutes of my time to it. That all changed, though, when I chose to revisit the game for this video, however. The Just Cause games have always intrigued me to an extent. Just Cause 2 and 3 were some of my favorite games growing up for a multitude of different reasons, but if I had to pinpoint it down to just one, I'd say the main reason would probably be their intoxicatingly vast and equally as stunning open worlds. The open worlds of the Just Cause games have never failed to present me with some of the most beautiful, breathtaking, and well-detailed vistas I've ever seen in gaming. And the lively environments and populated highways of Just Cause sort of help the game offer you a completely different feeling when playing these games that is 100% unique to these games. When trying to compare the vibes I get from playing a Just Cause game to the vibes I get from playing other sandbox franchises, I actually struggled significantly to find one that accurately reminds me of a Just Cause game. I think the partial reason for this is because of how Just Cause cleverly borrows from so many other notable games and reuses what was working at the time in its own unique way. At least the first game does anyway. This game is like a bizarre Frankenstein of sixth-generation game tropes, but they actually come together in the best and most baffling way possible. Like, who knew the underwater swimming and environmental fog from San Andreas would pair tremendously with narrative tones like international espionage, for example? This also makes it kind of difficult for me to just talk about these games with someone, because there is so much going on at once that it becomes increasingly harder to convey my actual thoughts about these games. The more that I notice one greasier cog that's running in this machine than just as fast as the rest. All these little things come together and help mold this game, and eventually this franchise, into its own shape, and there's almost no doubt in my mind this was all an intentional thought from the developers over at Avalanche Studios. Today, Avalanche Studios are well renowned for their ability to craft utterly massive and marvelous open worlds, but the studio had to start building that reputation somewhere. And to my surprise, they actually started developing it here, with this game. 2006's Just Cause. Normally, this is the part of the video where I start telling you all about how this game was developed, and sometimes I even throw in a quote from the dev team or something to that nature. But this is the first video where I simply cannot do that. I have scoured the internet and cannot find any kind of developer interviews or any kind of behind-the-scenes knowledge about the first Just Cause game. Wikipedia only notes that it was in development for about 3 years, and E3 listed it in their top 10 sleeper games of 2006. That is a downright criminal amount of underappreciation in my opinion, because the first Just Cause game is actually pretty damn good. This game doesn't try to do a lot of things, of course, but the few things that it actually attempts manage to land with me pretty well. Take the map, for instance. There were other notable open-world games on the market at the time, of course, but Avalanche Studios wanted to make the map of Just Cause the main focus point of the game, even more than the narrative in some areas. That resulted in the map being filled with outposts and activities more than story missions, and it's also the main reason the sucker is over 395 square miles long. I fell in love with the map of Just Cause 1. So much so that I've been casually playing and exploring around in it the whole time I wrote the script. There are just so many things to do at once, mixed with the way that the sun just hangs in the sky, smothering you with beautifully crafted god rays no matter where you are. It kinda just makes this whole experience intoxicating in itself. Well, that's not entirely true, I guess. There are only about 4 whole activities scattered through this entire game if you're being technical, and that's racing, collectible missions, side missions, and the liberating of various settlements. Racing is pretty fun. You just pick a random car from off the street or use the one the race provides you with in order to complete it, and you even get an achievement after you finish that specific race for the first time, and another one once you finish them all. The collectibles are designed a little differently from how I was expecting them to be, though. Once you collect one item in the bunch, the mission will start. You'll get a little bit of throwaway dialogue that explains what it's doing there exactly, and you get some more once you collect the whole set and another achievement, of course. One of these missions stood out to me because it had me search the entire map for 3 pieces of a supposed super weapon, and after I collected them all, I was expecting to not get shit in return. But to my surprise, a special kind of grenade launcher appeared back at all of my safe houses that no other enemies in the game could drop or use. That blew my fucking mind, man. Never would I have ever thought I would actually be rewarded for gathering such a mindless collectible like that. I liked this sentiment a lot about the game because it doesn't shy away from rewarding the player when they actually end up doing all these things like other open world games would nowadays. So, in theory, that means there should be something in this game for everyone, right? Well, it actually turns out not everyone was so thrilled with the number of settlements that had to be liberated. Some found them to be extremely repetitive, and I can honestly see where they're coming from to an extent. Just Cause appeals to me because I am a completionist and a bit of a perfectionist, so it was actually pretty fun flying from settlement to settlement, massacring whole towns and army bases at once. But if you're not looking for that kind of thing, this game doesn't really have jack shit to offer you. There are a total of 45 settlement takeover missions that are split between the factions, but every single one of them ends up playing out the exact same way. I mean, it's beyond repetitious. Unless you die by one of the unavoidable and unblockable missiles that are randomly fired at you during a military base invasion, of course. Then you gotta get another helicopter and go to that same base and do it all over again, buddy. After reading a few negative reviews online, I found this is one of the main reasons people didn't continue to stick with the game after the first few hours, and I can totally see where they're coming from. You start every one of these liberation missions by talking to the guy outside of said city or military base. Then you, him, and some of his buddies invade the poor place. You get the chance to mow down wave after wave of oncoming enemies until you destroy a barricade of some kind that lets you keep progressing by killing even more enemies. And then once you reach the end, you get to take out the mini-boss or raise a new flag. Either way, no matter what one it is, this marks the town as yours, and then the side missions will start to appear in that area afterwards. This was an incredibly fun gameplay loop the first few times I did it, but it got really stale pretty fast, and I only did all of them for the achievement if I'm being completely honest. The side missions themselves aren't that notable either if I'm being completely real with you. They were definitely designed to be fetch quests, in the literal sense here. They all consist of you traveling from one place, killing a guy, or stealing his car or whatever thing he had on him at the time, and then driving it to another place. They're all over pretty quick, taking just about 5 to 10 minutes each to complete. They're just mindless fun. There's nothing wrong with that, of course, as some would say it does what a video game was supposed to do, but there's also no narrative weight or real reason for you to be completing these countless quests, and I mean, literally, there is no reason unless I, the player, just wanted to. That's probably my biggest gripe with this game the more that I think about it. The narrative itself isn't really anything to write home about, so that in return makes the side missions and most other aspects of this game feel very lackluster in a way, or deprived of meaning kinda. I mean, for Christ's sakes, the entire campaign is just one big action montage of the player character doing the wackiest and most theatrical stunts I've ever seen in a video game. Don't get me wrong, it's all entertaining to watch, and I'd even say very funny at times, but if you're looking at it for any kind of narrative value, it appears you're just gonna have to wait until Just Cause 2, and even that one isn't really as narratively driven as the third game is. That doesn't really mean that I fully dislike the narrative itself, though. Sure, it's lazily written and very haphazardly thrown together, but I'm mainly just trying to point out how it's the worst part of this game. It's actually that special kind of bad, if you know what I'm saying. I saw another review of Just Cause where a guy said the first Just Cause game is the best bad video game he ever played, and I couldn't agree more with that statement, honestly. Sure, the story doesn't hold as much weight as I'd like it to because of how the writers had this odd fixation on women in bikinis, sexual innuendos, and, well, boobs. But if you can look past all that for a minute, the clunky controls on top of it, of course, you'll probably end up liking the story just as much as I did. The game isn't really long by any unit of measurement. I mean, I was able to complete the whole thing in just 2 gameplay sessions, and I was like driving around, getting footage, and doing all of that during my whole time playing. And I was still able to beat the entire game in like 5 hours. After doing a little bit of Googling, it appears there are only 22 story missions in the entire game, and none of them are really fleshed out enough to interfere with you goofing off in any way. So the player doesn't even really have to interact with the story if they don't want to, after beating the first mission, of course. The first mission starts with a cutscene of someone looking at the case file of the protagonist, Rico Rodriguez. In this game, Rico is portrayed as a badass, a ladies' man, and a complete psychopath, in that order. The later games do a good job of fleshing out his character and personality a bit more, but in the first game, Rico doesn't give a fuck about anything except blowing shit up. And that's really all the developers want you, the player, to do anyways, so it kinda works out. The only reason that you, the player, and Rico are here on this island is to overthrow the government, ran by El Presidente, the corrupt president of this region. But where Just Cause differs from other espionage shooters is its choice to give the player total freedom over their environment and allowing them to approach anything while guns are blazing, instead of making them rely on mechanics like stealth or tactical combat. This game actually puts a lot of emphasis on the over-the-top chaos kind of stuff. For example, the game opens by having you jump out of a moving plane and free-falling over 1,000 meters to save your friend Tom Sheldon, who was the same guy that was looking at your file earlier and is voiced by the lovable Richard McGonagall. That's Sully from Uncharted if you're unfamiliar. This is where the game takes the time to showcase how the free-falling mechanics and the infinite parachute work to the player. Free falling is tied to how high in the air Rico is at that current moment and will trigger automatically when he jumps from that said certain height. And once he is in the air, he can open, close, and reopen his parachute as many times as he wants until he reaches the ground. This is stupidly unrealistic, of course, but it actually adds so much to the gameplay loop that Just Cause managed to somewhat make this a staple as the series continued, if you can believe that. Once you get the hang of the parachuting and free-falling controls, though, you'll land on the beach just in time to save your old pal Tom Sheldon. The first game never really clarifies how you two became friends or explains why you work together so much, but there is a reason. I guess the game just expects you to follow along with what's being presented to you to take at face value, like when you meet Kane, for instance. Her and Rico obviously had some kind of relationship in the past that didn't work out, but the player never really gets to see any of it. They just get to hear reference after reference through the multiple different cutscenes. Technically, this isn't really bad writing per se, but in my opinion, it is kind of lazy on the writer's part. There were multiple times throughout this campaign where some important sounding moment just gets dropped into casual conversation, and I often found myself thinking, damn, well okay, but like, when did that happen though? The actual gameplay parts of the missions aren't bad at all though, honestly. Half of the missions usually end up in some kind of intense chase scene where Rico, or the player, gets to man some kind of mounted gun and shoot down countless choppers and blow up a shit ton of cars as they drag you through these calculated routes. These moments were a ton of fun and honestly some of my favorite when it comes to Just Cause, especially in the first mission where you get to lead your opposition into a surprise American F-16 fighter jet trap. A developer over at Naughty Dog Studios once said in an interview that water was one of the hardest things they had to develop when making the first Uncharted game, and it left them stumped in a lot of areas. Somehow, though, Just Cause has better water physics, and they just look better than Uncharted's water by a long run, and I don't know how they did it. This game came out a whole year later, and it was a 7th generation game, while Just Cause is still a 6th generation game on 7th generation consoles. This is impressive no matter how you look at it, really. There are just so many areas in Just Cause where the water glistens profusely as the god rays reflect off of it simultaneously, and it just leads to crafting these beautiful vistas. God rays alone are enough to make this game considered advanced by older standards, but I've seriously lost track of how many times I just sat my controller down and watched the sun set and fade over the horizon. Or how many times I just sat there and watched the waves roll back and forth on a beach's shore. Each time of day and weather cycle offers the player a whole new way to see the map, meaning this game can go from showing you blushful pinks and vibrant red sunsets to these cold, damp greens mixed with the dark, cloudy skies that drown out the sun completely, and it's all just fucking intoxicating, man. The amount of foliage that is dedicated to the environments also make this island feel like it is full of life. For example, there aren't any animals in the game, of course, but if you're driving around in the woods or off-road long enough, you can start to hear insects chirping and buzzing in the trees and bushes. This is obviously just an audio file that the developers inserted into the game, but it's little things like this that turn good games into great games, in my opinion. I'm almost willing to overlook how little there actually is out there in the wild and how bad the level geometry is out there, just on the sole fact that one developer thought the player might venture off. So they added a few noises here and there because they still wanted to give the players something to hear at the very least, knowing they couldn't add like whole animals to the game and shit. In the next few missions, Rico is introduced to the rebel and cartel leaders of San Esperito. The rebels call themselves the Guerrillas, and the cartel are known as the Rioja Cartel. There's a special tab in the menu that tracks your progress/reputation with both groups, as well as a political map that tracks the progress of how many provinces you've liberated in San Esperito. You don't really have to liberate all of them, but every settlement you do liberate will give you a certain amount of power points that go towards your rank in either faction. And to complete the political map, all you have to do is liberate all the provinces. I really liked the idea of these core systems, even though they're not fully thought out as they are in the other Just Cause games, because it essentially turned the map into a multi-layered cake that I could devour in a number of different ways from any angle, really. The factions themselves, though, don't really end up playing the key role in the plot that I thought they would be filling, however. I originally thought one of them would end up betraying you, but instead, an agency guy that you worked with for a total of 1 or 2 missions ends up betraying you and working with a fucking Nazi of all people, and the leader of the guerrillas gets gunned down in prison in a later mission out of nowhere. I guess the only real reason I thought one of these groups would do something like betray the player was because of how much time was put into establishing a relationship with them, especially the Rioja Cartel, for example. They have a rival called the Montano Cartel, but they only ever really get used as a means to justify liberating all of those settlements instead of them actually being brought into the greater plot. Well, I may have been a little wrong in that last assessment. There's actually this really fun mission that was ripped right out of GTA San Andreas where Rico must go and destroy a few Montano Cartel drug fields, but instead of marijuana, it's coke in this game, of course. This mission was a nice breath of fresh air, and thanks to this game allowing you to tackle any mission any way the player wants, you can actually end up destroying the crops in a variety of different ways. I took out like 3 whole fields of crops with nothing but grenades and bullets until I stumbled upon a utility car that was conveniently equipped with some pesticides that did the job a whole lot faster. Avalanche had to sacrifice the ability to tell a linear story with Just Cause in favor of allowing the player to complete the tasks in whatever way they please, and it kinda seems like a double-edged sword. On one hand, I love the ability to do whatever I want, whenever I want, and the ability to tackle missions in any way, but I also wouldn't mind if there was a little more restrictions thrown at me in a narrative sense. For example, no matter how many cities you conquer or military outposts you overtake, the resistance is all the same. No type of upgrade is given to the enemies whatsoever. And all that does is just make the first outpost fall just as easily and mind-numbing as the last one. The only difference between them is the 10 hours of gameplay that separate each other. Another mission that stood out to me based on its laughably outrageous notion was when, and stick with me here, I'm being dead serious, you have to eliminate a mob boss who's been bringing hookers to the top of this active volcano to have his way with them. Words cannot even begin to express how hard I laughed when the game was asking me to do this with a serious face. I thought there was actually no way that I heard that dialogue correctly. But to my surprise again, the game is being serious, and this is something I actually had to get off my ass and fucking do. Making the poor bastard evil and rapey wasn't enough apparently, they had to throw an active volcano in there too, so you really know that he's evil. Fucking, you might as well curled his mustache while he told you this. The gameplay part of this mission is actually pretty simple, you just go to a spot and then kill a guy. But the individual context behind the matters of the things I was doing is probably what made this mission so bewildering, and the reason I think it is one of my favorite in the entire game, honestly. This mission didn't make me ask myself anything in a reflective manner or question my motives in any kind of way like that, but it did provide me with a few laughs here and there, and I'll take as many of those moments as I can get in this economy. Earlier, I said the biggest gripe I had with this game was how incoherent the story was, and I think the main reason I think that is because of how the villainous group, the Black Hand, get used in the overall plot. The first 8 to 10 missions are when the game is taking its time to set up the story, and there's nothing wrong with that, of course, but halfway through the game, Rico discovers that El Presidente is in possession of a few WMDs, and he discovers that he's been working with this shadowy organization known as the Black Hand. Nothing else ever gets explained about them, though. Except how El Presidente is supposedly the leader of them. That gets explained to the player in the literal last mission, but other than that, nothing else other than dialogue is ever dedicated to the Black Hand, not even character models. The San Esperita military are the ones who mainly play the antagonists over the game, but on the last few missions they just get relabeled as the Black Hand without them visually changing their uniforms or anything. Well, they put a black hand on their logo instead of the actual flag of the state, but that's nothing really major. I know this is a super minor issue and it doesn't really affect the overall plot that much, but at the same time, I feel like the Black Hand could have been integrated into the plot a little better, because the idea of a shady, evil shadow government that pulls the strings from behind the scenes is a great concept in itself, and hell, it even fits the overall theme of international espionage really well. But it feels like a lot of just wasted potential the way they handled it in Just Cause 1. Thankfully though, the story does start to pick back up near the actual end part of the game, if you're willing to look past all the Black Hand stuff anyway. There's this one mission near the end of the game that asks you to assassinate El Presidente's 2 sons, and after you follow through with it, a short cutscene plays of him mourning them in silence. I could be completely wrong here, but I think the goal was to try to portray him as a human or something, or to at least show the player that he has emotions, or maybe your actions have consequences, something like that. Either way, whatever the writers were trying to convey ends up falling face flat because it happened at the literal end of the story. I mean, not even 5 missions from now we'll be hunting down and taking out the actual El Presidente, so I don't really know why this message was even trying to be said here. The final mission of Just Cause is actually split up into 3 different parts, where the game lets you save in between every mission. The first section begins with you invading El Presidente's private island via boat as the Black Hand try their best to stop you. Once you actually make it onto the island though, El Presidente makes his daring escape, but before he leaves, he activates those weapons of mass destruction he was holding on to. This is obviously bad because it could potentially cause a third world war if they were to strike the wrong country or the wrong city at the right time. This is where your pals Tom Sheldon and Kane show up to offer you a special fighter jet, and this is also where the second part of the mission begins. In this section, Rico, or the player, has to fly around and shoot down the active nuclear warheads that were just launched a few minutes ago, and I can't even express how fun this part was. I really don't think I'm going to be able to accurately describe it, but there is an overwhelming feeling of total badassery that fills my body whenever I shoot down a missile with a smaller missile. I don't know what that would be called, but it's there, trust me. The last section of these missions is probably my favorite though, and it's the narrative climax, the end of the game as well. Once the whole international threat thing is dealt with, the only target left is El Presidente. The only problem now is that he's making another escape, this time via cargo plane. So now Rico and the player has to use that fancy fighter jet they just got in order to catch up and board El Presidente's plane, take out all of his armed guards on board, and then after all of that, as soon as you finally get to him and the narrative is at its absolute peak in prosperity, him and Rico have finally met face to face, and as soon as you think this absolute badass brawl and hand-to-hand combat is about to break out, he dives out of the fucking plane. So, obviously, Rico's next course of action is to jump out of the plane and chase him because of that whole infinite parachute thing and whatnot, plants a stick of C4 on his back and blows the absolute hell out of him as he glides away into the sunset. Yep, that's it. Roll it up. Roll credits. We did it. Safe to say, I did not expect the game to end this way, but it was a whole lot of fun despite how unrealistic and goofy it is. It's pretty obvious at this point that the Just Cause games want to lean more into the over-the-top action-packed moments, and as long as they fit within the overall narrative, I don't mind them one bit, honestly, as campy and overdramatic as they are. Just Cause obviously wants to take itself seriously, at least to an extent, but by the plot not allowing itself to be constricted to standardized systems like realism or linear narrative structure, it allows the game to stand out with its own unique kind of aesthetic appeal, one that I can't really pinpoint many other games attempting to copy, like I said back at the beginning. I know the fact that I already criticized the narrative somewhat in this video is already going to make a few people think I didn't like the story or something to that nature, but I'd really be lying to you if I told you I didn't enjoy damn near every single mission in this game, at least a little bit. I know that's not very rich because there aren't very many missions in this game, but the ability to tackle them in whatever way I wanted left me with some memorable moments, and it helped me feel like I was actually in the shoes of Rico a little more. What I mean by that and what I'm trying to say is that by giving me the vessel of Rico, I was really able to feel like I was this strong-ass, badass international agent that was capable of demolishing entire governments if I just put my mind to it, thanks to my grapple hook and my vast variety of mass destruction-causing weapons, of course. All in all, Just Cause was a totally exhilarating experience if I'm being completely honest with you. This game is kinda old, so it does suffer from tank-like controls. Take the grappling hook, for example. In the first game, the grappling hook is a gun that Rico acquires halfway through the game, and it can only be used when it is equipped, meaning you can't shoot guns while you grapple. This was a huge shock to me, and probably will be to any other Just Cause player who is coming from the background of having played the second or third game before the first. This game is also rough around the edges, level geometry in the forest being its biggest one, and the roughest one. But if you're willing to overlook a few of these pieces, I'd say you'd probably have an even greater experience than I did. If the footage you've seen in this video looked fun and you think you actually want to pick this game up, I'd tell you to go for it, honestly. Nowadays, this game doesn't sell for anything other than $10, and you might even find it cheaper on sale. It's definitely worth the pickup in my opinion. Now, I couldn't find the exact sales metric to justifiably gauge how well the first Just Cause game sold. Metacritic rates it as a 7 out of 10, shocker there I know, but one thing is for certain. It sold well enough to justify a sequel. Hey, how's it going? Little postscript edit here. If you've made it this far into the video, I just wanted to say thank you. Seriously, I know this video isn't the most well-produced and technically sound out there, but I'm trying, really hard. I appreciate all the feedback, everybody listening and all that. And, well, I just wanted to keep this kind of short. Don't really have anything else to say other than thank you. If I've timed this all correctly, this video should come out on my birthday, so I really didn't mean to push it back this late. I've been working on this video for like 2 months, and this is like not even a 30-minute video. But, anyway, before I ramble on, thanks for watching, and peace. Have a good one.